E nā mana, e nā reo, nura o rangatira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora tātou, ko Clarissa Hurst au, kia roto o i te Financial Services Council. I'd like to warmly welcome all of you here this morning, bright and early, for our session titled From Zoomer to Boomer, What Really Makes GenZers So Different? Now, for some reason or another, we often tend to group ourselves in these generational categorisations, and while it might help us to feel a sense of connection and belonging with those who are also part of our generation, it can also create and foster division and misunderstandings between generations. There are moments in time that shape a generation for the better, and I think the FIFA Women's World Cup that's happening right now is a great example of that. It's going to shape an entire generation of young aspiring footballers, and it's also helping bring people together from different generations and bridging some of those barriers that exist. On the flip side, there are other experiences that shape generations for the worse. Things like a cost of living crisis or a pandemic, an overpriced housing market. For me and for Sarah, one of our speakers this morning as millennials, I won't speak for Sarah, but I'm still quite triggered by the whole avocado on toast discussion. And to me, that was like a year ago, but I think it was actually probably a decade ago that they first started talking around how we millennials were frivolous spenders. We were spending too much money on avocado on toast and flat whites, and therefore we'd never be able to afford to buy a house. And I remember, to me, at the time, that really cut to the core of how I felt about a world that excluded me at that moment in time. And it really sparked warfare between these two generations of millennials and baby boomers that you still see and read about in the media. You still probably experience it at family gatherings. And it really just cut to the core of this entire generation's frustration. And we all remember, I'm sure, that OK Boomer comment that just reverberated around the globe. And it united millennials, but it also pitted two generations against each other at the same time. And so what we risk if we don't attempt to understand each other, what drives us, what we value, why we do what we do, what integral experiences have shaped us, is that this kind of division continues and it manifests in distrust and misunderstanding. So what this session is really all about this morning is breaking down some of those stereotypes, some of the barriers that exist, and give us all a bit of food for thought around how we can better engage with our colleagues and with our customers who might be a part of Gen Z. So Gen Z or Gen Z, I'll probably switch between the two. As they start to enter the workforce in increasing numbers with their fresh ideas and new perspectives, they're challenging all of us to think very differently. If we look at what the research tells us, Gen Z are far more conscious of what's going on in the world around them. They are far more connected than ever before, tech savvy, unapologetic, they speak up, they don't settle. What we also know is that younger people, and this is both those that fall in that Gen Z category and the younger millennials, have lower levels of financial well-being and financial confidence, particularly in New Zealand at least. So let's dig into some more of these things. We have two fantastic speakers with us this morning. We have Amber Lee, who is a commerce student at the University of Auckland, and as I think you'll see today, she's a pretty incredible individual who inspires people wherever she goes. I'm really privileged to work with her as part of Auckland Young Professionals, and she inspires me on a regular basis, so really looking forward to having you here with us, Amber. And we also have Sarah Keenan, Associate Director, Organisation Transformation at Deloitte. Deloitte recently released, and you may have had a chance to look at it, the 2023 Gen Z and Millennials survey. So it's now in its 12th year, and the survey gathered feedback from more than 22,000 Gen Z and Millennial respondents in 44 countries, and it explored their attitudes towards work and to the world around them. And there are some pretty interesting insights in that report that we'll unpack today with Sarah. So kia ora and welcome, Amber and Sarah. We'll get into the discussion now, and I'll join you on the stage. You can use your phones at any time through the conference web app to submit questions. We'll take questions throughout the session, so don't feel like you have to wait until the end. If you've got a question right now that's burning, go for it, and I'll bring them up with the panellists as we go. So, I'm going to grab a mic. Hopefully this is working too. Yep. All right, welcome. I'm going to kick things off with a question, and I'll start with you, Sarah, and then I'll be really interested to get Amber's perspective as well. So, from the Deloitte research, could you paint a picture for us of who Gen Z are? And then, Amber, I'd love to ask you whether you feel that that is accurate and reflects your experience as someone that is part of Gen Z. So, Sarah, do you want to kick things off?
Yeah, great. Kia ora, everybody. So we're talking about an age group from about 17 to 28-year-olds. They're sort of born in the mid-90s to the early sort of 2010s, is that sort of generation. I think it's really important to talk about the environment that this generation grew up in: global instability, war, terrorism, post-September 2011, September 11 attacks, mass shootings, climate change. Quite a traumatized generation that we're talking about, lots of significant world events. I think when we talk about financial stability, we're talking about them seeing the wealth gap massively divide here in New Zealand and around the world. We're talking about cost of living, exponential increase in housing, transport. So their, as you said, their financial outlook is, a little bit more dimmer than maybe previous generations. Huge rates of teen suicide around the world. They're more likely a generation to report anxiety and depression. Other things to consider: this is the first generation that would never have experienced a world without the internet. The phone with the cord, that became obsolete in their generation. They would never have used that technology. And their buying power is literally at the click of a button. It's a one-click purchase away to anything that they want. So that sort of just helps us to recognise that that's the environment that we're talking about. And the hallmarks of the generation are really around things like very tech savvy. They are entrepreneurs. They like to explore new things. They communicate differently to how previous generations communicated. There is some research that says they have an 8-second attention span. I think that's a bit rough. But it's the speed of which things are occurring in their world is, I guess, a lot quicker. So they don't need to focus that long. They want financial stability. That's actually something that's really important to them. And obviously another hallmark of their generation is the global financial crisis, and their parents went through that, so they saw that. They prefer independence. So there's often a question around whether they prefer teams or independent work. And the research tells us that they are highly independent, but they don't like isolation. They value that human connection that they get with people. Ethics and practices of companies are incredibly important to them. They make their decisions on where they work, where they buy, where they spend their money. All those sorts of things are really centred around the practices of companies and the ethics. And then I think the final piece there is just around diversity. Previous generations have really valued diversity, but for Gen Zs, it's slightly different. It's more about orientation. So while the regular hallmarks of diversity are still very important, they actually go further, and it's more about orientation for them.
Great summary, Sarah. We'll dig into a lot of those themes and unpack them a bit more as we go. But Amber, I'm really interested when you hear that kind of your generation summed up. Does that resonate with you? Or if so, what particularly does resonate? And is there anything that you think, oh, actually, no, that doesn't resonate with me?
What, can you hear me? Yes. So what Sarah has mentioned here about the environment, it's all very evidence-based, and based on our environment, because we have internet around, we have multiple eyes. And because we have multiple eyes, we see a lot outside New Zealand. We see a lot happening in different people's lives, and we see it to a different length because we like to share. Okay? We share on different platforms, we share in different ways, and we don't just share our experience, but we share much more. And, well, okay. When we share our experience, we're not just sharing our struggles, but we're also sharing our knowledge. So because we're sharing our knowledge through internet is our best access to each other, despite being in different sections of the world. If it does reflect to me. I feel like without internet, I wouldn't necessarily be able to grab the opportunities I have grabbed. Ever since I was in primary school, we had an email address. We did our homework through the email address. Everything was on internet. Right now, I'm in uni. If I did not have Wi-Fi, I wouldn't be able to do much. A lot of our textbooks, a lot of our coursework is online. So it's very understandable how it's not exaggerated when we say we cannot live without Wi-Fi. Yes. Regarding the financial stability, it is, I say, what monkey see, monkey do. We see our parents, our grandparents, they do a lot for us to bring food on the table, to provide for the simple things such as education, to provide for our school fares, for our books, etc. And because of that, we see them actually working multiple jobs. And because of the pandemic and the financial crisis, we can feel what our parents feel, and we want to step up, help out, especially since we're actually going to be gaining more responsibilities, going into university, student loans, actually picking up things to help around the household because, you don't get any younger. Yes, I think that just seeing being quite observant because we have multiple eyes is the biggest impact we have, or the biggest contributor to us actually being able to experience more than we have in our current life. Yes.
And Amber, I don't put that mic down just yet. I'm wondering if you could perhaps share with the audience a bit more about yourself and your story, because it's pretty inspiring. And just, like where you grew up and your experience with your family and how you got to where you are now.
So I'm from South Auckland. So I did a lot of my schooling from primary school all the way up to high school in South Auckland. And you do see a lot of low socioeconomical families living there. Now, because of that, I see a lot of families on benefits struggling to provide family. And that's where I get my experience seeing multiple family members actually having multiple jobs on end. My friend, actually not just my friend, multiple family members that I know, not just from my school but from other schools as well. One parent works day shift, the other one works night shifts. And because of that, you can see the struggle. And because there is struggle, there is tension. And because there is tension, there was worry. Okay? And that worry is always passed down to the kids because it's their future that they're working towards with. Majority of the parents live for their kids, and because they do that, they want to provide for the best, but they're also having to work much more harder on themselves for their kids. Personally, I actually was raised by my mother. She is very incredible. Money was never a taboo. We always talked about money because growing up at home, there was hardly any money left. So she actually grew up in Vietnam on a farm. And what happened was that they actually had to go scavenging sometimes because it was that hard. And because of that, she wanted to share all her knowledge that she had onto me. And she learned about financial literacy, and it was all passed down to me. But what I noticed is that because of that experience that she had and the different point of view she had for me, many others didn't have that. I have friends who are also raised by their single parent. They're not very into financial literacy, and it's most likely because of their parents. Okay, well, monkey see, monkey do. In the research for the Deloitte survey, if I just pull it up, half of Gen Zs and millennials say they live paycheck to paycheck, and they are taking on side jobs to make ends meet. Living paycheck to paycheck, that's behavior that they have learned from past generations. Now, because of that, well, monkey see, monkey do. When they're living to paycheck, they're passing on what we know. Okay, you don't know what you don't know. Okay, and because of that, you're actually passing on behavior that isn't really helpful for our generation. But then you don't know what you don't know. That was.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that, Amber. Sarah, just before we dig into the research a bit more, I'm just wondering, is there anything that resonates with you about what Amber was saying in terms of what you might have learned from your parents or your grandparents? And
Yeah, I was just actually reflecting on your story and reflecting on my own as well. So I grew up in a household with split families. My dad owned a small business. He was a vet, so he owned his own practice. I'm from Dunedin as well, so from the south. And when my parents broke up, my mum was a stay-at-home mum. And so she had to go back to school and she had to study. And she actually eventually went back to university as well. So I grew up in a household where there wasn't a lot of money and there was always financial pressure as well, although I think I always had a bit more of maybe a safety net with my dad. I think from my grandparents, my grandparents were amazing, but they were old by the time I was old enough. And they had their own house and they were very financially stable. They weren't big spenders or flashy spenders. So I'd say I was from quite a financially conservative family. How that reflects to me today, I think definitely have a very strong work ethic. And I think also, I'm always thinking about financial security first. Although my parents have often said that that's not the case. But that definitely has always been, I've never made a decision without feeling financially comfortable that I could survive if that decision went wrong. So I would say I have quite high risk adversity.
all right, let's dig into some of the themes that you've both sort of touched on already, but we'll go a little bit deeper. If anyone does have any questions, please send them through. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we'll bring them up as we go. So the internet. As millennials, so you and I, Sarah, sort of grew up without it, and then at some point it just kind of took over our lives. Whereas, as you mentioned, for Gen Z, it's like just that's the world, I guess, Amber, that you live in, that you've always known. So yeah, how has that shaped each of you, this world of being so connected?
I can go first. I remember being in primary school and there was like a computer for the school and it used to get like moved every month to a new classroom. That was my first sort of education as part of a computer, and if you were good, you got computer money. You got to spend that on like 10 minutes on the computer. But as I've sort of grown up, when I got to university, assignments were all submitted online. You still had textbooks. But as I entered the workforce, my very first job was working in hotel reservations, and I remember them telling me, oh yeah, we kindly, you need to check your email sort of like once a day, because you might get the odd booking via email. Today, I've left the industry 20 years later, and 95% of hotel reservations are done online. So I think that the millennial generation at least, we remember what it was like beforehand, but we've seen the growth. So we have that level of awareness, I think. But even now, I feel outstripped. The ChatGPT thing, I'm just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned before, in primary school, I actually have my own email address given by the school. And it's quite funny how you mentioned the computers actually being passed down to different classrooms, because we actually had an ICT room, a computer just full of a room just full of computers. And we actually had class hours going to that room. And I think it's quite ironic thing, because going to primary school to intermediate to high school, you needed your own device. And that is where I see a lot of the struggles coming in, because computers are expensive, let alone having phones to actually communicate with parents. And sorry. Because we have needed our own computers, I think that's how we actually were more interacted via internet, because we just had a device right in front of us. It was so much more easier to do things.
Do you feel, Sarah, now, because as you mentioned, as millennials, we remember what it was like without being so connected, and now, I notice it in my friend group, for example, people are moving away from social media or taking time off from Instagram or Facebook, or we just feel overwhelmed by emails, and you just kind of have to, it's almost like we remember what it was like, and there's that nostalgia for what it was like before. Do you ever feel that?
I'll be honest, I've never been of the type that have loved social media. I have a Facebook, but that's where I sort of limit it to, and I don't really post on it that much. LinkedIn obviously is really important, I think, to our generation, but I think for us, we do know what it was like, and I do hear more and more people saying, let's take a social media break. But I wonder, for Gen Z, is that actually, turning off social media, is that actually something that, that you would do en masse, because it's so pivotal?
Social media plays a big part in our generation, just because that is how we started communicating. Personally, I do take social media breaks, but it is very hard when you're actually trying to develop your professional self. LinkedIn, yes, gotta keep that on, because the professional world, business world, does not take a break. Just keeps on going. So in order to keep up, you got to keep on going as well. And I actually have other friends who take social media breaks as well, but they can only do it for a day, because people are always trying to reach you. The world never stops around you, so you got to keep on going.
I was just going to say, I think it's interesting how we look at social media. I think my generation looks at it as it's something we can engage in if we want. And I often get criticised, because I think my phone is there for me to reach other people, not for them to reach me, the other way around. So I think that our generation has the ability to kind of hold technology at arm's length.
How do you think, when this manifests in the workplace, where you've got perhaps people of older generations that aren't super maybe tech savvy, or they don't have social media, or they don't want to have social media, and then there's millennials that maybe are feeling a bit disillusioned by it and kind of want to check out. But then you might have colleagues, team members from Gen Z that, like you say, Amber, like you can't just switch it off and want to be on it all the time, and that's what you're used to. How can you kind of overcome those different feelings about it when you're in a working environment?
A lot of it will just come from prioritizing and actually mental health. Social media, because there are so many perspectives on there, we are at an age where we are easily influenced. Okay? When we see different experiences, we will make decisions based off that, not just our own. And, wow. Sorry, what was that question?
So I guess imagine you're I guess you're still at university now, but imagine you were to enter the workplace and you're so used to using technology, using social media, you're on it all the time, and say you're working with a manager or you encounter a colleague who is maybe a bit unsure about using these platforms or doesn't really think it's necessary, or maybe feels a bit differently to you about all of these things. How would you sort of take them on that journey or help them understand where you're coming from?
I think I'll start off with the assumption that Gen Z are all tech savvy. Just because we grew up with it doesn't mean we like it, and because some people don't like it, they tend towards to pull away of it or have the minimum of it, the bare minimum. That is me. Yes, yeah.
I like that, just not assuming anything.
I worked with a lady who was, I think, maybe late Gen X, maybe even early baby boomer type thing, and she has only really just got her LinkedIn profile going. And there was a conversation where I had to take a photo for her. She had to get coaching on, why it was important to incorporate social media into her brand. And I think this is an experience that a lot of people go through, is that it becomes so prominent and such a critical part of being part of the workforce that you have to coach, and the younger generation is often put in a position where they are coaching that older generation. I've seen a lot of reverse mentoring type programs in companies, which are hugely successful when you partner sort of an older person with a younger generation coming through, and there's that the younger generation does the coaching on the tech and the apps and all those sorts of things, and the older generation does the coaching on the leadership. I've seen those programs be incredibly successful, and both parties get something out of it. I think, part of my previous roles have been in doing learning and development, and I've seen a lot of investment going into, supporting older generations with some of this newer technology. But equally, I've also had older generations say things to me like, oh, we can't do this, we can't computerize or digitalize this process because our workforce doesn't know how to use a computer. And I've just seen my answer to that has been the one skill that we could give the workforce today is to help them be comfortable to learn to use a computer, because it's not going to go away. And for them to continue to be successful, we need to continue to support the growth in digital literacy skills across all generations. I don't think it's just isolated to the older generation. But yeah, I see tech can still be a barrier, but I think the attitudes of some of the maybe older staff is to continue to let it be a barrier, because their own digital literacy skills are maybe not quite as well developed either.
I think I need some mentoring in TikTok.
I actually don't even have TikTok myself. Big procrastinator. No.
I do. I love that idea, though, of reverse mentoring. It doesn't always have to be, the older generations mentoring the younger, but it can be this, two-way process. I love that. Amber, you did mention mental health, and so I wanted to dig into that a bit more. And Sarah, you mentioned earlier teen suicide rates. We are talking about mental health more now. We do see the younger generations are more open and willing to talk about it. Do you have any thoughts around mental health and how the different generations view it and talk about it, and perhaps how we can open up that conversation?
For Gen Z, we're definitely breaking barriers down in terms of mental health taboo topics. Definitely breaking that down in regarding like sexuality. Older generations, you had to hide behind the closet if you were gay or lesbian. And because we're actually trying to break down those barriers, those conversations are very difficult. Because they're difficult, there's a lot of pressure involved, and because it's not just that kind of pressure, but relating to the financial stability, there is also pressure in that, money plays a big part in our world, and some people may say that money doesn't make you happy, but it does provide things that make you happy. And we do understand that, like having a laptop just to do our education, that makes us happy. Because money plays a big part in our lives, our mental state is somewhat connected to that. If our family is well off, a lot of our feelings or emotions are connected to actually being able to provide things and being happy when you're able to provide that. And our parents, when they provide things, they're also happy. So whatever our parents are feeling, we also feel it too. That makes sense.
Maybe just to give you some stats on this from the Deloitte research. So 46% of Gen Zs and 39% of millennials say they are stressed at work. 6 out of 10 Gen Z and around half of millennials said in the last 12 months they've experienced microaggression or sexual harassment at work. 70 of the top 4 concerns that each generation had, it was largely very similar. So it was around financial security, unemployment, health. The millennials said it was sort of more physical health, access to health care, whereas Gen Z said it was more around mental health. And then the fourth one was around crime for both of them, the rise in crime. So I think mental health is, something that's on both generations' minds. It's just, I think, potentially for Gen Z, it's your ability to speak up and ask for what you need. Most generations reported that there had been progress in this space and they had seen companies' efforts in this space, but that largely those efforts were very surface level and were not part of the actual culture of the company.
Okay, so then I guess next question for you, Sarah, is how can organisations help foster this culture where people feel safe and comfortable to show up at work? Because we know that, Gen Z and millennials, of course, we both want to feel the sense of belonging at work, to be ourselves, bring our full selves to work. We are, burnout is a huge topic at the moment as well. How could organisations sort of help foster a good working environment where people can feel mentally well at work?
This might be a little bit controversial, but 75% of both generations reported that if your employer asked them to come back to work full-time in the office, they would consider leaving their employer. And I think if you delve into some of these stats, it says something like 55% of both generations have flexible working arrangements or remote working arrangements, and 55 to 61%, roughly in that category, both generations want it if they don't already have it. So I guess, and the other interesting thing about these stats is that they were actually even higher amongst people who had ethnic minorities, reported disabilities, or LGBT plus communities. So I guess what that's telling us is that actually remote working is incredibly important for people's mental health. And that's actually what the research says as well, is why they like it. They feel like they have more work-life balance. 1 in 4 actually reported a concern that it could actually be a barrier to their career progression because they feel like they don't have access to learning and development or sponsorship within a company, or there's that proximity bias that tends to happen in career development. So I think when you think about that stat and you think about mental health, what it's telling us is that working from home is really important for people. Being able to have that flexibility and work-life balance is equally as important as to how much money they're getting paid. But most importantly, the research tells us is it's not all about isolation. They actually genuinely want human connection. They just want it to be highly meaningful. So nobody wants to turn up to an empty office. The once a year that they actually come into work, they need to have like a reason to meet with people. So I think that's quite interesting from a mental health perspective when you consider the conversation that's happening in the workforce about companies suggesting that it's a time for people to come back to bricks and mortar.
It's actually quite interesting how the percentage is high because I think the biggest factor is that we know time is on our side. We know that there are other opportunities out there, and that's actually connected to us actually holding back some things for a better opportunity.
Amber, what would you be looking for if you were applying for a job at an organisation? What would you be looking for in terms of what they could offer you?
Number 1, work-life balance. There are so many things I want to do out there. There are so many adventures I want to go on. Travel the world is one of the biggest one. And, in order to do that, obviously I need to work and get money. I need to invest, and not just invest financially, but in myself. That's the biggest investment that I see possible. And I think in order to be better for a company, you need to gain more experience. And I feel that that is not just obtainable through social media, but also just going out into the world. And we need time to do that, right? So I think work-life balance is the biggest one. Also the second one, which is also shown in the Deloitte survey, is that financial stability. Like we have seen a lot, and we understand that money does make us happy, so we want to be able to provide not just for ourselves but for our family. So financial stability, second one. And the third one is definitely just training. Okay, you invest in me, I invest in you.
Some of the stats to back up that financial stability piece is 25% of Gen Z reported planning to leave their employment within a year due to pay. And 55% of both generations believe that asking for a raise will become more difficult in future years. So pay is really incredibly important.
I would also like to ask about side hustles because this is something that came up when we were having some chats prior to this session. Amber, I remember you talking about how important that was, and that's something that perhaps employers do need to consider, is that the younger generation coming through will have other things, other passions, other interests that they're working on the side. Maybe they won't be too happy about it, but is that something that employers just have to get used to, is catering to that?
Yes. There is I see two sides to side hustling. One is actually just trying to survive, and the second one is trying to be self-employed. Okay? The side that is trying to just survive, that will just come from the financial burdens that the family has and trying to help out, okay, to make things easier for our parents. The other side, to be self-employed, we all have our own skills, we all have our little interests that we want to develop on, and I think it's really cool that we are known as the side hustlers. We're independent, I see a lot of the time, and because we're independent, we want to make our own rules, we want to make our own workforce, we want to make a lot of it on our own, despite standing on shoulders of giants, really.
So in the survey, it said 46% of Gen Z and 37% of millennials already have a side hustle, and those numbers grew quite substantially from the previous survey. So more and more people are having a side hustle. I think the interesting thing about the Generation Z is the side hustle is less about a sort of like a second job in the sense that, you know, you're turning up to a second building to work. It's more about leveraging technology, the gig economy, the Uber driver, food delivery type thing, or monetizing your hobbies and passion as well. Others. I've got a funny story about this. I work with a Gen Z who was telling me about not one side hustle, but two that he has. One of them is about his hobby. He's developed like this card game about his sporting passion. And the second one, which is quite a funny story, he was telling me they went to this wedding and it was very hot. And, you know, when you're in those situations and outside and you're all dressed up and you start to sweat. And there was one person in their group that didn't sweat through their shirt, and they said to them, you know, what are you doing? Like, how are you achieving this? And he said, I've got sanitary pads under my arms. And from there, he's developed this business around supporting, like, not obviously sanitary pads, but like a sort of upscale, upmarket way to stop sweating through your good clothes at weddings. Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of you know that business is around solving problems of our customers, and that's actually we have resources available and technology has advanced, so we actually know how to leverage that in order to solve more problems, and I think that's definitely a really good idea.
Yeah, I mean, he was telling me about how he's reached out to the supplier in China and he's got quotes and he's got a marketing company, and I'm sitting there thinking, I go home and walk my dog.
Once you have the idea, if there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
So I guess just coming from, again, like from an employer's perspective, if you've got these younger generations coming through that are entrepreneurial, they've got all these interesting ideas that solve people's problems, they want to, you know, they're supporting maybe other people outside of work, they have interests, passions, a life outside of that, they also want to travel, do all these things. From an employer's perspective, that might be a bit scary because they might be able to attract these younger people in, but they might be worried, okay, in a year or so they're going to go travel the world, or they're going to go start up their own side hustle that will stop people sweating at weddings. So is that a genuine concern, or is it something that, we just all have to just accept that maybe people will come and go and that's part of life now?
Yeah. Well, you have the right to be concerned. You know, we're always into self-development. We're always trying to be the better version of ourselves. And, you know, there is always a time to go. You know, there will be someone else better that you can train, someone else who will have a new perspective to increase the outcomes that you want.
I think it's incredibly concerning, and people should be on notice about this. I think why we use these characteristics or ways of explaining generations is to prepare and plan. They become less helpful, obviously, when we use it to explain the behaviour that we're seeing in front of us. But what we see at Deloitte is a lot of organisations that are grappling with these questions. And to be honest, personally, I think we could have grappled with these earlier and been more prepared. So I think things like considering that the concept of a job is dying. Really, it's about, should you be hiring for a job, or should you just be hiring really great and clever people and finding them something to do in your organisation that, best uses their skill set? Do you hire somebody, say, like a marketing job? In the past, it was just about creative thinking. That marketing person today needs to have creative thinking, analysis and analytical skills. Like the actual diversity that sits in jobs is quite substantially different as well. So I really think, organisations who are moving towards more like marketplace of skills and then sort of bringing people in, organisations should be considering how they harness more part-time workers and how they actually really think about how work is done and changing the way that work is done in their organisations. And we've seen a lot of organisations wanting to move to more agile ways of working and sort of teams with the right skills coming together for sort of a piece of work and then disbanding and new work coming along. So we've seen a lot of that. I think these are genuine questions that organisations need to be planning for today.
So we've talked a lot about, I guess, attracting and retaining, or trying to retain Gen Z talent within sort of organisations. But before we run out of time, I just also wanted to ask about engaging with Gen Z clients and customers, because a lot of people in the room will be working in organisations where you have products or services that you are trying to get out there to these younger generations. And the theme of the conference is building consumer confidence. Amber, maybe I'll start with you. When you're looking at, financial products and services, what is it that's going to get you to engage as a consumer of the Gen Z generation?
Number one, accessibility. We have a lot of apps these days that cater ordering food. Push one button and it's at your door. Second, I definitely think just the knowledge behind financial services. A lot of the perspectives out there is that you guys just want our money. And because we want to change those myths or those pre-assumptions, I'd say, to actually be something that you want to help us. And it's just increasing the knowledge out there.
So some of the research on this says that 7 out of 10 Gen Z take active steps to minimise their impact on environments. So that can be anything from choosing not to drive. We've seen a huge shift in the generations about their ability to have a driver's licence, but also then if they are driving, what sort of car are they selecting to drive, hybrid, fully electrical type thing. The minimisation of things like fast fashion and, using secondhand clothes. Even their diets are changing, their preference to be vegan or vegetarian, because these are all things that minimise the impact on the environment. But interesting, it also said that over 50% said they're actually really concerned about being able to afford it. So they want to make good and conscious choices, but they're actually worried that business and products are not sort of in their price range that offer them these sort of the satisfaction that they want out of purchasing them.
So I haven't seen any questions come through, so I'm not sure if it's just we're all still waking up or something else, but Tom, go for it.
Amber, I just wanted to ask you about, I love the monkey see, monkey do, what you were saying and how behavior sensitivity can check the paycheck and down. And then you mentioned, well, maybe other behaviors for your generation, what do you think those are?
Financial literacy. We have a lot of myths behind financial literacy that acts as barriers. Barriers. Problems aren't barriers, but they should be guidelines, and that's actually what I try to teach through my students. For context, I teach karate, and through karate, I teach how they think about their problems, and I try and build up their mindset so they can use that outside of the training dojo. And if they are able to think a certain way about a problem, then they will be able to transfer it to another situation. And financial literacy is definitely a barrier I see in a lot of families, not just in Gen Z members, but it starts from the parents. So probably targeting the parents so that they actually pass it down onwards. Did that help?
Do we have any other questions? Yes, at the front.
So I'm in cybersecurity and I have a real fear of the wide use of social media. How would you help me explain those risks and concerns to a socially connected group? As you talk about always on the internet, social profiles, LinkedIn, all those things.
Right. Oh, that's a tough one. Sorry, that's a tough one. Actually, just being able to share knowledge that is understandable in Gen Z language, I suppose. Providing knowledge, I probably go straight to the school, but I don't. Social media is a big thing to attack, so I understand your point of view.
Maybe it's, I guess it's a little bit of perspective, because you're talking about an older generation explaining to a younger generation something that they actually just can't comprehend. And it's like maybe the risk factor is different for generations. Like you're of a generation where you identify and see those risks. They don't see those risks the same way, maybe. Like it's just part of acceptance of a social media culture. Yeah.
We did grow up with it, so we just accept things like that.
There was a question up the back. Yeah.
I was working by home, but I work from home by way of example, I sort of thing. So you mentioned, there's a huge proportion of people who are consider leaving their job if they're not given that option. At the same time, I think that we're challenged by younger staff not receiving development training and opportunities, which they often don't get if they don't come across themselves. So how, as leaders or management, can businesses manage that conflict without feeling like they are having direct staff to come and stop this? That's only going to push them further away.
I think it's about addressing what is driving the conversation around you have to be present to be developed. And that's a point of view and a perspective that's been ingrained in generations above. And so my answer to that has been we need to invest in leadership skills and development skills, like as in our senior leaders need to know how to develop people in a remote and work remotely. I actually worked with somebody and I had to have a conversation with him the other day. He's a bit older than me and he really struggles to work in a fully virtual team. And his sound bites to me were things like, I can't just turn around and ask a question now. And I sort of said to him, I can't change the environment. We're geographically diverse as a team. We're always going to be virtual. I said, so how can I help you to be more comfortable in that environment? And that's, I think, the training and the investment that we need in senior team members is how to get the same results, how to lead and develop in a more virtual or remote culture. And that is, I think a really huge conversation to be having. And we're only, as companies and organisations with post-COVID, really probably having to grapple with that at an expedited rate. than maybe what we had post-COVID. It was sort of something that was trickling in as opposed to the waterfall of that requirement now. What do you think?
I agree. Oh, yes, I agree. Yes.
We do need to wrap up. I'll go one more question. If you do have any others, you can come and chat to the speakers at the end. But I'll get a very angry boss coming in here soon to kick us out. Ainsley, last question.
This question's actually for you as a millennial and someone who remembers the expansion of the cargo debacle from a few years ago. As you have matured in age and you've experienced a cost of living crisis, can you sort of understand now where the realism is coming from?
We just say no to that.
I actually don't mean to really put you on the spot like this, but it works both ways in terms of us understanding Gen Z. I'm not kidding, proudly. But it does work both ways. So we have some lived experience that's very different to your lived experience. And I think this idea of reverse mentoring is a really good one, but actually just on my original question.
I would say it's still very triggering for me, and it sparked a lot of heated discussions in my family. But I would actually say yes. I think during the pandemic, I was working in the travel sector, which obviously just ground to a halt. And for the first time in my life, I experienced this sense of job insecurity. Like day by day, I didn't know if, I'd get a call from somebody saying, look, we're really sorry, but we'll have to let you go. And, I had to watch all these other people in my industry that I worked with, just getting made redundant, and because, they had no jobs to do. And I'd say, that was the first time I actually it kind of went through my mind, oh wow, like this is the first time I'm experiencing this, but there were all these other people older than me that have been through this, and they've been through it multiple times. And so I ended up talking to some people and just going, look, how did you navigate that? And just the wisdom from those conversations really, I think, benefited me. And now the cost of living crisis that we're going through, again, it's sort of maybe not the first time I've experienced that, but it's the first time I've experienced it being old enough to actually be impacted by it. So I'd say yes, definitely, to answer your question. And Sarah might have something to add there too.
I just think that we eat our Avo on toast at home now. We just don't go out for it.
But only when it's in season.
Exactly, yeah.
That was such a great question too, and I think hopefully that one of the takeaways from this discussion is that it's all about just opening up the conversation, and the younger generations, we can learn from older generations and vice versa, and just sharing that knowledge and experience is so important. But I don't want to keep you any longer because we've got plenty of action happening in the main plenary very soon. But I just want to give a round of applause to Sarah and Amber. Thank you so much.